Hello, I'm Antoinette James. Welcome to Behind the Beehive, where I look behind the political show and try and find the truth. Today I want to talk about New Zealand, New Zealanders, and why so many of us are still sleeping. We know there are things very wrong politically, yet we don't know how to start untangling the web of lies and deceit. But there is hope on the horizon, and I also want to finish with that. But firstly, we've been brought up for generations on the concept of Labour versus National as our main major parties, one left wing, one right wing. But we need to change the ideas of how we see politics. We're not really in a world now that is for the labour force or for the corporates. We're now in a more of a geopolitical zone where much of what affects New Zealand happens overseas. Much of what affects New Zealand affects all nations in the world, particularly the Western nations of the world. So our government in New Zealand, since really 1992, when Jim Bolger signed the documents for the Earth Summit, the United Nations Earth Summit, since then we've been pretty much on a course for absolute disaster, a course that will shrink and extinguish small businesses, shrink our farms, herd us into cities, a loss of car ownership. Already in New Zealand, we don't get our ownership papers anymore. We get our registration papers. We have now been given the liberty to travel rather than the right to travel. And that's going to keep going down the line until it gets to our houses and our properties and our right to actually own property. All this goes back to Rio 1992 Earth Summit. In New Zealand, particularly over the last, say, 10 years with the Key government and the Ardern government, we've got governments that are not backing and batting for Team New Zealand. They're backing and batting for Team Globalist, the UN, that is basically the shopfront for the globalist agenda. When John Key was in Parliament, he donated $7.7 million to the Clinton Foundation. The Clinton Foundation is just a slush fund, a money laundering fund for their own benefit. We weren't asked as citizens whether we would allow that colossal amount of money to leave the shores when we're fighting to get warm homes and more housing and better infrastructure. Key decided that he was going to change the flag, all part of the globalist agenda that comes under that United Nations 1992 Earth Summit, and the agenda that was birthed from that, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030. Agenda 21 is the global part of Agenda 2030. That's the more the local to national part of that Agenda 21. There's the same thing. Key also made Auckland into a super city, part of that big smart city that Agenda 21 under their sustainable development goals that the people of New Zealand are going to be herded into. He also started the bicycle lanes, which Ardern has put millions, if not billions, into up the southern motorway of Auckland to get us out of our cars and onto bikes and in public transport. Ardern has also donated 150 or 160 million, $160 million to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, she says, for breast cancer and such like. We know that the pharmaceutical industry is part of that big corp, part of the United Nations agenda, that all our medical or health benefits will come from one source, big corp, the Rockefeller medicine, the allopathic medicine that we've all been told is the only kind of medicine that's going to help us. we need to really just start to think about these things and wake up. Jacinda Ardern has committed New Zealand to Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and she said publicly several times that her aim is that New Zealand will be the first nation in the world to have that fully rolled out. That means no home ownership, no, probably not, you will not have the right to grow your own food, the right to collect your own rainwater, the right to travel, the right of free speech, the right to be a stay-at-home mother and be a full-time mother if you want to. All those things are going to go because under Agenda 21, humans are unsustainable and we need to be depopulated and we need to be controlled for our own good and for the health of the planet. This is agendas come out of Marxist writings that go back to the first half of the 20th century. What I'd like to do today is just have a look at a document called Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars that came out in the 1950s, but was particularly well underway in the 1970s. This is a CIA document that got leaked. It was not supposed to be in the public domain at all, and it was a document for new trainees, attendees, to get them up to speed with this conspiracy against the people, particularly for the people of US, but of course that pans out to be the people of the world, because this agenda that starts off as a United Nations agenda attacks the US first and into the Senate. We have a lot of revolving door type situations in politics. John Key, for example, which is probably part of the reason why he gave that money to the Clinton Foundation for his pay to play. The elites have their own little crony big boy club, and we do too. They call us cattle, they call us cannon fodder, they call us Goya, whatever. But they expect us to have a pay to play as well. That's why we need permits for everything we do. That's why we need a license for everything we do. That's why we have to pay for all these permits and license. We pay to play. So a little bit of background on the Agenda 21. It sits on different philosophies that helped propel it into a working model for corrupt governments around the world. So I'd like to just read a few excerpts from Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. The Rockefeller Foundation got their fingers into this very quickly in the 1950s. It also was part of the doctrines that were of the Bilderberg meetings that started in 1954 that basically select every president of the United States since. I have it here before me, and I just want to read a few little things. It's a 43-page document, and it goes into, some of it's quite technical. It goes into the metaphor of finances and how finances, particularly the Rothschilds, formulated their approach to milking the people and bringing a fiat money system, a tender money system, into play around the world. And what the CIA realized is that they could then take that further as part of some social engineering and starting to control we the people. So page 4, I'll just read you this. This is just an introduction, a welcome aboard to the new attendees for the CIA domestic war, really, against us. We're in a quiet war. They realised that World War II, the hot war had finished, but they realised that they could then carry on and keep the war, the battle against us going. They destroyed the lives of millions of European young men through the First and Second World War, reducing the population from 30%, I believe, of the world's European demographic to 10%. So they did great inroads there to destroy European culture and Western culture. And this is how they're going to take it on from there. So it's a quiet war and therefore has silent weapons. So they use the Rothschild model of economics and the war analogy to carry on with their agendas. So on page 4 it says, the solution of today's problems requires an approach which is ruthlessly candid, with no agonizing over religious, moral, or cultural values. So they're determined to have a ruthless action plan and not to worry or be concerned, have no empathy. And they're encouraging their candidates to not deviate from the plan. Once we get over to page 43, we learn a little bit more about how they see us and view us as people. Well, hardly. So I'm just going to read a couple of little paragraphs here. This is a factor 3, mothers. The female element of human society is ruled by emotion first and logic second. In the battle between logic and imagination, imagination always wins, fantasy prevails, maternal instinct dominates, so that the child comes first and the future comes second. A woman with a newborn baby is too starry-eyed to see a wealthy man's cannon fodder. That's what the baby is labelled at, cannon fodder, to be used for tomorrow's wars. See a wealthy man's cannon fodder or a cheap source of slave labour, workers for the state. A woman must, however, be conditioned to accept the transition to reality that we are slaves when it comes, or sooner. So that's one of their agendas, that they can slowly brainwash, mind control mothers into thinking that they're raising the next generation for the state. Factor 6, it's labelled cattle. That's us. Those who will not use their brains are no better off than those who have no brains. And so this mindless school of jellyfish father, mother, son and daughter becomes useful beasts of burden or trainers of the same. We're just pawns in their hand. We mean nothing to them. This is an elite's world. It's run by the few for the few. And the rest of us have got to be prepared and controlled to be their servants. That's what the school system's all about. Once we pull back to page 36, there's a little bit here that I'd like to read to put it into context for you. So we've talked about, their desire to have us as workers for the state, and that we need to be totally controlled and we need to be forced into that submissive position. So this is going to be achieved by disengaging their minds, sabotaging their mental activities, providing a low-quality program of public education in mathematics, logic, systems designed in economics, and discourage technical creativity. The last 20 years, thanks to Helen Clark when she was Prime Minister of New Zealand, we now have the United Nations Common Core curriculum rolled out in our schools. The United Nations agenda says in writing that well-educated people spend more money, make more pollution, are more consumers, and this is unsustainable. So the best way to do it is to dumb the people down so that they don't become educated, they don't become middle class, keep everyone down in the lower classes. Second way of achieving this, engaging their emotions, increasing their self-indulgence and their indulgence in emotional and physical activities by unrelenting emotional affrontations and attacks, in brackets, mental and emotional rape, end brackets, by way of constant barrage of sex, violence and wars in the media. And that's what television is. It is their propaganda box sitting in every home in New Zealand. And the more hours you spend in front of the box, the more hours you are being propagandized. And they're achieving their goals. Especially the TV and the newspapers. Also, giving them what they desire in excess. So making sure there's plenty of it, and then blame them for being overindulgent, but making sure there's plenty of it. Junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need, which is a good education, being aware, being informed, knowing who the tyrant is, and having our nation controlled by us. Our parliamentarians should be servants of the people, not change agents as they seem to be today. Another way they're going to achieve it. Rewrite history, which we know in the early 1900s it was all rewritten and edited. We do not know real history today. And subjecting the public to the deviant creation, thus being able to shift their thinking from personal needs to highly fabricated outside priorities. These preclude their interest in and discovery of silent weapons of social automation technology. The general use is that there is a profit in confusion. The more confusion, the more profit. Therefore, the best approach is to create problems and then offer solutions. And we know this is Hegelian dialectic. The government create the problem and get it to a situation where it's unattainable. The people are over here screaming for help. Then the government says, well, look, we can give you this and save the day. The people have had the tension, screaming for help, say yes. And with that, they lose a little bit more of their freedoms. And this is the way it's been eroded in New Zealand over the last 20 or 30 years. We're into a situation now where with this government, we've really been brought up to globalist speed. We've had our terrorist attack that sure looks like a false flag, sure looks like it was prearranged and the government were well informed before it happened. Real people died. Our Muslim community were devastated. It played into all the narratives that we have been told is so white supremacy that Ardern tells us is on the rise, which I do not believe. There's always racism. You get that. I'm not talking about that. I think New Zealand is a fabulous model of multiculturalism myself. Multiculturalism was an experiment by the elites. They've exposed that. They've told us that. It wasn't an organic thing that happened around the world. It was a planned thing to cause problems. But I think New Zealand's a great model. I mean, there's always improvement. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I just think we all get on really well. Diversion summary, I'll carry on. Okay, so here we go. Media. Keep the adult public attention diverted away from the real social issues and captivated by matters of no real importance. We're asleep. We're sleeping and we don't understand it. We're still thinking it's Labour versus national and who is going to go with them and which way is the country going to go. We're still all caught up with that instead of seeing that we're being taken over by a technocratic dictatorship from outside the country. Schools. Keep the young public ignorant of real mathematics, real economics, real law, and real history. All of it. We don't have any of that now. History has been taken out of the New Zealand curriculum I think about 30 years ago now, and it was tucked under social studies. And social studies today, under the Common Core curriculum, is teaching our children Marxist values, how to be a good global citizen, how not to complain, to be compliant, and to own nothing, because this is social justice and social equity. Entertainment. Keep the public entertained below a 6th grade level. And everything on television, including the news, is at that level. We're dumbed down so that we have no way to inquire. We aren't able to sharpen our thinking. We aren't allowed critical thinking. And that was really seen during the Christchurch terror attacks when Ardern shut everything down. We were treated like babies. We weren't even allowed to see the video or the YouTube. Now, we may not want to have seen that. Who wants to? But to have a mummy at the top dictating to her children that we are not allowed to look at this because you are too young is an appalling situation. If you really think about it, this is bad news. And most of New Zealand capitulated. We're just asleep. We need to stand up and say, no, government, actually, no. Entertainment. Keep the public entertained. Oh, I've said that below a 6th grade level, and that's in Hollywood, the lot, everything. And it's always Marxist type of social engineering that goes on. My husband and I are watching Star Trek at the moment with our youngest son. Each night we watch one, and we're having a lot of fun doing that, actually. But the social engineering is horrific, and he has to keep telling me to stop talking, because there it is again in subtle ways, training our minds to accept one thing which is so different to what we have known in the past. New Zealand is a very conservative nation, always has been. And it amazes me. I know people that have immigrated from America, immigrated from Britain, and they're really keen to see New Zealand become a socialist country. I just wonder why they come here. Why are they coming here to change our country? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a daughter of an immigrant, but my mother hasn't come to change the country. She came after World War II and was very grateful to find a place of freedom and democracy. Yet people are coming into the country demanding that we become a socialist country. If they want to be in a socialist country, there are plenty of socialist countries around the world. They can go there. If they come to New Zealand, you can vote Labour. That's your free choice. But don't be a change agent that the United Nations say are useful idiots. Don't come into a country and destroy it from within. I'll stop there. Work. Keep the public busy, 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 with no time to think, back on the farm with other animals. That's what we are. We're just other animals. Get them back on the farm, back on the reservation, keep them working. I'll just jump down a bit and just finish with a couple of other things here. This information consists of the enforced delivery of well-organised data contained in federal and state tax forms, collected, assembled and submitted by slave labour provided by taxpayers and employers. This is particularly written for the American scene, but earlier on in the documentation, they're talking about the world. This is specifically training these men and women for the American scene, but this is a global agenda. Consent coefficients. Numerical feedback indicating victory status. Psychological basis, when the government is able to collect taxes and seize private property without just compensation, it is an indication that the public is ripe for surrender and is consenting to enslavement and legal encroachment. A good and easy qualified indicator of harvest time, that's us. We're just something to be harvested, is the number of public citizens who pay income tax despite an obvious lack of reciprocal or honest service from the government. That's what I mean by a sleeping New Zealand. But the good news is that here in New Zealand, for the first time historically, we have a new party that is rising up. It's called the New Zealand Public Party. It's a grassroots party that's sprung up from the people, and it's the fastest growing party in New Zealand. It's nearly the biggest by membership party in New Zealand, and people are standing up as candidates all over the country. And this is the old model of a democracy, particularly in the early years of America, where your ballot paper didn't have names. You wrote the name in of the person in your community or in your state that you would like have govern. This was a privileged position, and people were expected to take the honour of that position for a period of time. It wasn't to make them rich. It wasn't to be change agents. It was to be the voice of the people. The New Zealand Public Party is having meetings all over New Zealand. And I believe this Saturday they're organising a big rally in Auckland, encouraging people to go. It is a party worth looking at. It is the only party in New Zealand that is anti-Agenda 21, anti-everything I've just read from silent weapons for quiet wars. It is getting a lot of attacks, it's getting a lot of abuse, it's getting death threats, it's getting a lot of lies told about Billy Te Kahika, who is the guy that's heading the movement. He didn't particularly want to be a politician. He was exhorted by many texts and emails and people around the country asking him. He's got a military background and also in the police. He's a family man and just an ordinary guy that's had a small business near ruined, as many businesses have been through this COVID illegal shutdown that our government performed on us in a very clever little sneaky form. Let me finish with a quote from a speech Sir Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of Great Britain, gave to the US Congress in December the 26th, 1941. In Victorian days, Disraeli said, the world is for the few and the very few. That's the 1% of the 1%. That's the elites. Those are the people that are in high office in the UN, their shopfront. Therefore, says Churchill, I have been in harmony all my life with the tides that flow on both sides of the Atlantic against privilege and monopoly, and I have stared confidently towards the Gettysburg ideal of government. Of the people, by the people, for the people. I owe my advancements entirely to the House of Commons, whose servant I am. In my country and in yours, public men are proud to be public servants of the state and would be ashamed to be its masters. If only our prime ministers in New Zealand would have that same call, that same voice. I do believe the NZPP are going to be and wanting to be the people's voice. Many other smaller, unregistered and registered parties are joining because they're putting down their party for the sake of New Zealand. Please do look at NZPP. I'm wanting to bring some more little reports like this to you, and I'm very interested in the NZPP. I'm also interested in the other parties and how they are reacting and responding. And this 2020 election, we need to have 2020 vision. Do your homework and check out what's of value to you. Do you want to live in a socialist utopia where you own nothing? Because that's the United Nations projection for 2030. I think they're running behind schedule at the moment due to Brexit and due to the Trump administration in America foiling all their plans. And I think that's one of the reasons why over the last couple of years, New Zealand has been their focus to bring us up to globalist speed. It's time to say no. We want to create change organically, not by people that have got no empathy, no feeling, no investment in tomorrow of New Zealand or our children, our grandchildren's future. So I'll leave you with that. And do some reading. If you're not a voter, really think about whether this could be the time, because the future generations of New Zealand are relying on you. Thank you for your ear. This is Antoinette James.